Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for the April Q&A Part 2. If you missed Part 1, that's up on the channel. But before that, please watch this video to the end. And then before that...
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Icewhale and their new next generation Zima Board 2. Powered by the Intel N150 processor with support for up to 16GB of memory, the Zima Board 2 is a high-performance single-board server, equipped with dual 2.5GB Ethernet ports, dual SATA ports, and PCIe 3.0 expansion, all while featuring the latest Zima OS built in. Paired with Zima OS, Zima 2 effortlessly transforms into a lightweight NAS, offering one-click RAID setup, remote access, backups, and more, making it easy for users to manage scattered data with simplicity and efficiency. Meanwhile, the Zima OS App Store provides a rich ecosystem of hundreds of third-party apps, turning Zima Board 2 into a versatile home server to meet diverse needs. Zima Board 2 also lets users flash their preferred systems, and with its robust hardware expandability, it can become a self-hosted server or even support advanced setups like clusters, ready for enthusiasts to explore. Zima Board 2 is now live on Kickstarter, so for more information, please check the link in the video description.
Devil's advocate question. If we as gamers accept that as long as Nvidia and AMD have more lucrative markets, we are going to get the leftovers when it comes to die allocation, should we be willing to accept another generation on the TSMC 4NP process before going to a smaller, non-bleeding edge node in order to get more and cheaper gaming GPU supply? So this was a big topic back when cryptocurrency came around, where there was this whole discussion of making the mining cards on the latest process node and then reviving like older generation cards on old nodes. And there's probably a few reasons why that was not necessarily viable. You know, if we look at products now, like how is Nvidia going to be getting a significant performance improvement from next generation products on the same process node? The 5090 is already a massive GPU, and you couldn't feasibly make it much larger. So unless there's like a major architectural overhaul that can be achieved on the same process node, they would basically be re-releasing the same products. In which case, like, are they willing to sacrifice margins and stuff to just give you a 5070 for like a lower amount of money that's the same die size and that sort of thing?
They can't develop a new GPU architecture for a new process node and then backport that like what Intel did with 11th gen. It just doesn't work very well. It's an inefficient way of going about things. And if they did that, chances are they probably wouldn't end up, for all the research and development efforts to go into doing that, it probably wouldn't be any better than what they already have. So they could just effectively refresh that, like what AMD's done many times in the past with older Radeon generations, which we don't want to see, obviously. So it's just, there's no good solution to this problem.
Yeah, I think this idea would work, or maybe not necessarily like a re-release, but just keeping the products on the market for longer and lowering the price over time. This would work if the nodes became substantially cheaper once the latest bleeding edge node was available. But that seems to be happening like less and less, or at least the impact that we're seeing from, you know, the TSMC 4N node becoming the 2N node on the leading edge for the next generation seems to be, you get a little bit of a discount from the wafers getting cheaper once the new products are available, but those nodes are still used for other things, other products. You know, yes, the next generation products are launched on those nodes, but other companies come in and want that capacity for their products. And so it's not often the case where the old nodes have tons of this spare capacity.
They're just retired and sitting around dusting, collecting dust, waiting for something to happen.
Yeah, they're not sitting around waiting to be used, and they're trying to sell them off dirt cheap. They're still heavily utilized nodes, especially these days, with so many different products that need semiconductor manufacturing. So you might see a small discount. You might see the memory get a little bit cheaper as new memory technology comes in. But I don't think it would make a product like a 5070, like that sort of die size, significantly cheaper. Ultimately, the company doing this would have to eat margins. And as we know, companies do not want to do that whatsoever. And as you brought up, you know, the architectural thing, usually what happens when they create new architectures is they try and use more transistors in the architecture to get performance and other benefits, which is great if you've got that new process node because they're denser. It doesn't matter to, like, you're not going to be making an even larger GPU die on a new node. You backport that, where are all those transistors going? It's making a larger GPU die, which again kind of defeats the purpose of this question. If they made a larger GPU die, it's going to cost them more. They're just not going to want to do that. So this might have worked years ago when there was more of that difference between the node pricing, where things got cheaper much more rapidly, but it's just not the case at the moment. Can Nvidia get away with offering 8GB VRAM for entry-level cards 2 years from now? What if AMD also follows and keeps the trend alive? Well, it's a very simple answer to this question.
I don't think they're getting away with it now based on... We'll have to see.
That's right.
This generation hasn't played out. It seems like they've pushed it too far. Now, look, I was pretty annoyed when we got the 8GB 4060 Ti for $400. I thought that was just outrageous. Again, I review these things and look at it from a consumer's perspective. Like, I have friends that buy these cards and stuff like that. So you might just think I'm some YouTuber that gets graphics cards galore and I don't care, but that's clearly not how it works with our reviews. We really want to see you guys getting good value products, and an 8GB 4060 Ti just wasn't it, which is why I hit back at that product so hard. And I thought at the time, there's just... it's crazy how it's played out. I basically said, this card's not going to age well. For $400 US, it's a terrible investment. Please don't buy it. Very bad product. And we get to today, and boy, like, I look back at that content now, I think that's aged so well. Like, that product is awful today. Look, if you just play games like esports games that you're probably sitting there thinking, mine's fine, that's fine. But we're talking about more in general, like all types of gaming, the ray tracing aspect of things, how well it can use frame generation, what upscaled resolutions can it handle, all that sort of stuff. Terrible, terrible product. And at the time I just thought, this is going to age badly, and there's no way we're getting 8GB, like a 5060 Ti. And I remember the leaks early on suggested the VRAM configurations were going to be the same. We mentioned it multiple times, and I'm like, yeah, this is what everything's saying. Part of me's like, yeah, of course. But then the other part of me's just like, there's no way they're going to do that. So
I think some of it was, while we made a lot of content, you specifically made a lot of content about how bad 8GB was 2 years ago, there was quite a bit of pushback against that content. It was kind of like,
oh, yeah.
We were setting, like, imagine Nvidia's up in a medieval castle with their 8GB GPUs. And it's like you've rolled in first with your one single trebuchet to, set up your siege of the castle, right, against the 8GB overlords. You've come in and you're just the lone small army there.
I'm like a guy on day one at Micro Center trying to buy a 5090. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Like Nvidia, they're inviting in all the fanboys who are entering the castle, and they're shouting at us, being like, no, guys, 8GB is still fine. And we saw lots of arguments around that time with people saying, one of the chief examples that was used was that the 4060 Ti is not fast enough to use some of the settings that require high amounts of VRAM, which you had disproven in the video anyway, but it was still something that was talked about a lot, like, oh, you're not going to be doing ultra settings gaming or high levels of ray tracing on that card. Again, despite the fact that there was many examples where settings were reasonable on the 16GB GPU, very playable, unplayable on an 8GB card. And it's been over the last couple of years that a lot of other people in the industry and creators have joined our siege. They've made their little armies around the castle walls as well. We've seen, especially in the lead up to these 8GB GPUs, lots more content quite clearly demonstrating how ineffective these cards are, how bad they are, how they're not going to work. And I think Nvidia was potentially anticipating that, if it's like an us versus them situation again, like it's Hardware Unboxed out there, their small army out on the hill, beyond the moat or whatever, and they're all alone, and everyone else is sort of on the same page that 8GB is still okay in some scenarios, and they're seeing the sales. They've invited into their castle all the buyers, all the people that bought that card in droves, right? They're probably sitting there going, this is going to work again, because it's still up in the air that it's not fully proven in the minds of gamers that 8GB is insufficient. Now, again, enthusiast audience, people that watch our content had that opinion, but I don't think 2 years ago it was broadly accepted yet. Whereas now, and I think maybe what caught Nvidia off guard and potentially has caused them to not do reviews for a 5060, for example, the non-TI model, is that probably in the last 6 months, all of that discussion has ramped up significantly. As soon as the rumors were coming out about the 8GB cards, lots of people started engaging it. You looked at it again. Other creators were looking at it. And so the walls broke down, right? People went over the drawbridge and pulled up the portcullis or whatever and stormed the castle. That's basically what's happened. And Nvidia just hasn't been able to hold the fort for as long as they, I think, anticipated. So talking about 8GB cards in 2 years would be, all that discussion is me sort of saying, I think it was a wrong decision for them to make the 8GB cards, but I can sort of understand why they would have angled towards that configuration. Because I think they thought that 6 months ago they would have been able to get away with it. Especially maybe they were considering a bit less competition from AMD. That maybe played into it. Maybe they didn't anticipate the B580 as well, coming with 12GB for $250, but it's not available. So all those things in mind, like, bad decision now, it would be AMD Radeon killing the brand level stupid. Like, we talked about all their terrible decisions previously. Like,
no, we never criticized AMD. Never done it. Never happened on the channel. Prove it. Never happened.
We've sat here for so long talking about all the mistakes Radeon made, how they never learnt their lesson, blah, 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 keep repeating the same mistakes. It would be that level stupid and crazy 2 years from now in 2027 to release an 8GB GPU.
Yeah,
it would be mind-blowing.
Nvidia, you don't want to go AMD stupid. Don't do it. Don't do it.
And again, I'm not ruling it out. I think if I was a betting man, I would bet that in 2027, the lowest end Nvidia GPU will be an 8GB card again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think your medieval analogy was very fitting for very aging VRAM capacity. So good work, Tim. But the reason why they won't do it for the next generation, and this is going to be a fun clip to watch next generation, but the reason I believe, maybe naively, that they won't do it again is because you just watch this 5060 Ti 8GB thing. It's going to be near unusable in 3 years from now. And it's going to be, and people are going to be up in arms carrying on about that sort of comment, but go get a 4GB GPU, even a 6GB GPU today, and try and play the latest games at 1080p with medium to high settings. Forget about ultra and very high. That's not happening. That is the situation you're going to find yourselves in with an 8GB graphics card in 2 to 3 years. Certainly 3 years, I would say. I'm willing to say 3 years from now, 8GB is going to be brutal. And I'm not talking about upscaled 4K or even 1440p. I'm talking about native 1080p using like medium quality settings, which is what we're seeing in Indiana Jones today. I think that's going to be more the norm then. So it would just be crazy. They just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, you're going to get a lot of people who will be burnt. Like, let's be real here. This card will burn people.
Well, the previous gen ones did.
The previous gen ones did as well.
The RTX 3070 did.
So those cards across multiple generations now have been burning gamers. And it does get to the point, as we've seen with things like Radeon drivers, as an example, where gamers will be unwilling to return to the brand that has burnt them. And so I think there has been, again, played into a little bit with this issue, has been gamers being unsure of whether the games that they're playing are stuttering or having issues because of the game optimization versus the graphics card. So there has been times where people have cranked their games up to ultra, it's a stutter fest on an 8GB GPU, and they just go, well, that's the game. It's Unreal Engine 5 or whatever that has a terrible reputation.
Not that we're defending Unreal Engine 5.
Not that we're defending it, but basically some gamers have thought that it's the game's fault when that game would have run much better, not necessarily removing all the stuttering issues, which is an issue in Unreal Engine games across a wide variety of graphics cards, but the game does run better on a higher VRAM capacity. And so if gamers learn more of this, especially casual gamers where, it wasn't actually the game that was holding me back. It was that graphics card I bought. Why did I get that card? And it's the same with driver issues. It's, I bought that card, I had black screens or games are crashing. Mm-hmm. You might originally think, okay, that was that game that crashed. The first game I played wasn't a great experience. Then you get a year in and you're like, man, this thing, like, it crashes in every game. Like, what's going on? I have display issues. What's this? Oh, it's a driver issue with that. I'm just not going to buy that brand again. I'll buy the other brand. Mm-hmm. And that is what, if you burn customers in that way over a long period of time, and there's a viable alternative, which I think we believe there is viable alternatives now, you cannot burn customers for generation on generation.
Especially when it's evident that they're getting burnt.
So
and like you said, like a lot of times it was, reviewers or other people who have RTX 4090s say the game runs well, and it's actually not necessarily because they have an RTX 4090 GPU. It's because that GPU is armed with enough VRAM. And so when it becomes really apparent that the reason why your experience suffers so badly or just sucks is because of this planned obsolescence. Nvidia's just not giving you enough VRAM. So once people know they've been played there, they're getting burnt, especially when, we made that poll on the channel. So many people, if they come and say, so what GPU should I buy? And, someone who's the tech-savvy friend may not know absolutely everything. They may have only watched the RTX 5060 Ti reviews and not even known there was an 8GB model or forgotten there was because it's quite a forgettable product, and just said to their friend, RTX 5060 Ti, great product for you, go get one of those. And then they go to whatever retailer it is. Most retailers, calling out PC Case Gear, for example, they don't have an 8GB and a 16GB section. They just have RTX 5060 Ti. You go there, you sort by cheapest, and you'll get like an Asus Prime. They might be familiar with the Asus brand and go, yep, they're good. Bang, grab that. You've got the Asus Prime. Because you're not going to search and spend $100 more, $150 more to find the 16GB version of that card. Because first of all, you might not know there's a 16GB version of that card. You might not even know what that means. You've been told get an RTX 5060 Ti. And I see a lot of this sort of, we get accused of like elitist stuff because we use 5090s and stuff. But I see that more as the people like, well, if you go and do that, if you just go to PC Case Gear and you buy one or whatever retailer, that's on you. Like, do your research, learn. But that's just really bad take, in my opinion, because like, are you an expert mechanic? If you go get your car serviced somewhere you trust and they do a bad job, is that on you? Like, or if they rip you off, is that on you? Are you a dentist? If you go to the dentist and have a bad experience, is that on you? Like, do you know everything there is to know about everything in the world? Or are you just a gamer and you want to have fun playing games? You don't want to become a PC technician to enjoy your games with your friends? So I really don't like that attitude and that mindset where it's like, well, you didn't know that there was an 8 and 16GB version, so that's on you. You don't know what VRAM does or the importance of it, so you're an idiot and that's on you. Like, I get for our audience, you guys are educated and you seek out that information. That's great. And you guys know to avoid the 8GB 5060 Ti. But from our perspective, because we do consumer advice and reviews and we're looking at people who buy these products, we want it so it's very clear. So it's not, it's not easy to be misled. Like, you don't want everything in your life where there's a trap.
You don't be dodging the minefields left and right as you're trying to navigate buying a product.
So if your friend says buy an RTX 5060 Ti, and they're very clear on that, and you go buy an RTX 5060, then, it's still a bit confusing, but it's like, you got to pay a bit more attention. The TI part was important in that message. But when they're the exact same name, and people are, they're not the same name though. It's RTX 5060 Ti 8G or 8GB and then 16GB. It's like, no, they're the same name. Even on the box, it says in big bold text, RTX 5060 Ti, and over here it's like 8GB. Ignore that. Just by the, anyway, that's my main issue with this product, is how it's marketed and the naming and all that, because it's just very bad.
Yeah, and that has the potential to burn customers, because if they do buy the 8GB card and then, again, like 2 years later, they're like, or realistically, immediately they realize it sucks, then like, what's wrong with this card? And maybe they'll do a bit more research and try and learn a bit more about the product that they've purchased. And then if they realize, oh, wait, there was actually a second model, and the second alternate model that I didn't realize existed is the good model, do you reckon the buyer's going to be happy about that scenario, learning that there was actually the non-trap GPU available for them? I feel like maybe some people go, okay, my bad, I bought the 8GB card, maybe I was supposed to buy the 16GB card and I didn't do enough research. I feel like a lot of other people will be like, well, why is there two versions of the same card? And especially, again, at the retail example that you brought up, or even Newegg, if you go and type in like 5060 Ti to get to that section, they'll be like, well, why do they have the same name? Like, I just thought there was one model. And that, again, plays into hurting the brand, hurting the reputation, and making it less likely that someone is going to go back and buy that same brand
You can
again.
even end up spending more money and getting a more premium card, because you're like, well, I can afford this price range. I've got a bit of, $50, $70 more. I would like to get a nicer, cooler, a bigger, more impressive looking card, something I can be really proud of. And they end up spending more than what you get a 16GB card for to get a premium 8GB card. It's just a mess. But yeah, the sort of the nuance around this is really important, because our take on like an RTX, 3070, for example, was quite different. We still thought that the 3070 was a great value product. We just had concerns at the time that 8GB VRAM buffer wouldn't age as well, and something like a Radeon RX 6800, which is a little more expensive, but would age considerably better. And that certainly turned out to be the case. You can still use an RX 6800 quite comfortably today in a lot of games. RTX 3070s, I know a lot of you guys have had them or still use them, and yeah, they're a real headache trying to use those things today because the GPU is still quite powerful. It's let down by that VRAM buffer, but at least in that example, while we could caution you that maybe that won't age particularly well, there was one RTX 3070. So if you decided to buy that product, it wasn't like, there was a good version and a bad version. You did get the TI later on, but which was still 8GB and even worse. But anyway, so that's that. All right, at what price difference would you recommend the 5060 Ti 16GB over the 5070 12GB just because of the VRAM?
I guess the first thing that I need to know from you, considering you do all the testing and benchmarking, is how much faster is the RTX 5070 compared to the 5060 Ti when not limited by VRAM?
It's about 30% faster on average.
So that's quite a substantial margin.
It's definitely it's a whole performance tier up, isn't it?
Well, it makes sense because of the naming, right, and the price. So that makes it difficult because in a lot of titles, 12GB is not going to be a major limiting factor. It is going to be a problem if you're interested in obviously like the super high tier quality settings, like path tracing, for example, in a title like Indiana Jones doesn't work too well on 12GB. And you showed some examples, I think, of where 12GB is struggling a little bit, but it's not an 8GB situation. So most games are going to run quite well.
Yeah, the concern's more for 2 years down the track or between here and 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like, how much value do you place on the 30% more performance for 2 years and then maybe down 2 years later it's not as good and the 16GB card comes out ahead? Yeah, how much value do you sort of place on that and what sort of price difference would it make sense? I kind of lean towards it just being, I mean, when you're talking about like a 30% performance difference right now, the pricing structure is probably reasonable as it stands right now. I don't know how much cheaper the 5070 would need to be to sort of counteract the 4GB less of VRAM. It's a tough one. Like, I think we would both say at the moment that the value is pretty similar, isn't it, in terms of cost per frame? So you could really go one way or the other. I think it depends as well, like, is a 57, like let's say path tracing is an issue and you're not going to be able to run path tracing games. Like, is a 5070 going to be good enough for next gen path tracing titles in 2 years? I mean,
I think if you're looking at 5070 type prices, you buy a 9070 or a 9070 XT. That's yes, a more suitable, better equipped product within that price range. If you're not interested in Radeon GPUs, and let's just say for a fact that you're really going to require 16GB of VRAM in 2 years from now. It's just the games you play, the way you want to play them, 12GB isn't going to be enough. Then the 5070 is not really an option for you. So you're either looking at the 16GB 5060 Ti or a 5070 Ti, which is obviously a really big price difference there.
I mean, I guess the other angle is, do you buy the 5070 now and just upgrade sooner, doing the planned obsolescence thing that Nvidia wants you to do, right? So is that going to be an option? Like, because I think the issue there with your example you've just made is that the 5060 Ti is genuinely quite a bit slower. So you're basically saying for the next 2 years, I'm getting 25% less performance. And then the 5070 Ti is like 20% faster or thereabouts, I think. And it costs $750. So it's a lot more money as well.
Yeah, it's a toss-up. Like, what's going to cost you more money to upgrade again in, say, a year or two, let's say 2 years, or just spend more money now and get a 5070 Ti and then maybe not have to upgrade in 2 years? You might be able to go 4 years. It's all crystal ball stuff. It's really hard to say. Basically, the point is, I don't think you would necessarily purchase a 16GB 5060 Ti over a 5070 sort of period. It doesn't really make sense. They're two kind of very different things. And I get the whole VRAM angle, but yeah. I
think the issue with the reselling thing as well is if it turns out that in 2 years it's well established that 12GB of VRAM is not enough, suddenly the resale value of your 5070 is going to fall off a cliff. So if you've had this idea, yeah, it's going to be great to resell it in 2 years and just buy a new GPU. If everyone else is doing that at the same time, you're going to see a situation like we're seeing today with the 4060 Ti 16 and 8GB models, where the 16GB card has retained significantly more value on the secondhand market. And so it's all well and good to sort of say, yeah, you might be able to make money back in 2 years selling a $550 card. Who knows? Maybe tariffs will be 7,000% or something. So you end up making more money. Who knows? But certainly, I think these cards, once you get above the 5060 Ti 16GB, it's largely on the performance more than the VRAM as to which cards make sense to buy. It's just unfortunate that the 5070 doesn't have enough VRAM. And potentially that is something that could be fixed with a super series in a year from now. So another option, of course, would just be wait. Though these days waiting is a highly questionable decision in the GPU market, because I don't want to necessarily recommend that to people. But if you were anticipating a super series that may fix that, if you wait a year, potentially there's another product available. But I think the thing that you said earlier in this question, which is basically, if you're after a 5070, just get a 9070 XT instead, is probably the best advice that we can give at the moment for people tossing up this sort of problem.
Do you think AMD using GDDR6 memory instead of GDDR7 for the RX 9000 series was the right call, or will it come back to haunt them in the future, especially at higher resolutions? Well, I don't think it's ever going to come back to haunt AMD. From AMD's perspective, it was clearly the right choice. It's cheaper, more plentiful memory, and they're selling more GPUs, I think, than they've ever sold before. So that's clearly a win for them. How it will age, that's more a problem for their customers. It comes sort of back to the planned obsolescence thing we've talked about with Nvidia not giving enough VRAM. If your GPU doesn't age particularly well, you just have to buy a new GPU, don't you? And you're either going to AMD or Nvidia. So not a big problem for them. But look, I don't think it's going to be a situation where you find yourself in a year from now or 2 years from now or even 3 going, oh, gee, I wish this thing had GDDR7 memory. I'm quite clearly memory bandwidth limited. That's what my problem is. I don't think that's going to happen. Look, it may be a situation where had it had GDDR7 memory, it will have aged a bit better. And it may be a situation where the GeForce GPUs that do have that memory end up aging a bit better. Hard to say on that one. But I don't think it's going to be a make or break thing. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. And if it means having a better chance of buying a GPU now at a more reasonable price, that's probably going to be a win for most people.
I think the real answer to this is going to come in the next month when we see the 9060 series, because as you sort of said, the whole advantage to sticking on G6 memory is its affordability. So with Nvidia stuck using 8GB of G7 for the 5060, then potentially if AMD can offer 16GB of G6 at a similar sort of price, down in that $300 US range, then it won't really matter that it is of a lower bandwidth, because you simply will be able to play games that the 8GB G7 configuration won't be able to. So I think a much bigger factor this generation is getting enough VRAM at a good price, as opposed to the memory bandwidth configuration.
Yeah, capacity is the bigger problem.
So of course that goes out the window if we're talking about 8GB versus 8GB. Then maybe you do want the higher memory bandwidth, not sure. But it would seem, based on the supply scenario and things, that it will be more possible to deliver a 16 gig solution at a similar price to a lower capacity G7 solution.
Yeah, what you're saying is absolutely right, because if you gave most gamers the opportunity to buy the 8GB 5060 Ti, but with 16GB of memory, but GDDR6 memory, they would take that. Like
100%.
You would, if there was two 16GB models and the GDDR7 model was $50 more, then and it offered roughly that equivalent performance uplift, then fine. But I think the GDDR6 version would be an ideal, more affordable version. So anyway. All right, which X3D CPU is the best value on AM5 now that AM4 X3D stock has dried up? So I'm just going to assume that we're talking about gaming here, because if we're not gaming, that the answer is kind of, well, it's not super obvious. It's kind of the same problem, but let's just go gaming because, we primarily focus on gaming. So really, I don't like the 7900 X3D and the 9700 X3D, for example. Not a big fan of those CPUs, though sometimes they do get really cheap, so worth buying. But I'll just stick to the 7800 X3D and the 9800 X3D. And I had a bit of a look before. The 9800 X3D currently isn't in stock at Newegg, though by the time you watch this may have changed. But the listing price, the 7800 X3D, is $100 cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
So based on that, I would get the 7800 X3D. It's at most, I think, about 10% slower. Oh, sorry, no, that's wrong. It's about 10% slower on average. At most, it's about 20% slower. So it's not really worth paying. I think it was 25% more or something more, for the 9800 X3D. There isn't really, there's no real wrong option there, but I think at the current pricing, the 7800 X3D is the better value product. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're really looking at getting a great value CPU, then there's that.
I think the exception would be if you're buying like a super high-end graphics card, like a 5090, in which case then you may just want the best of the best, because in a lot of situations, and this is always the awkward thing, right? It depends on how CPU limited you're going to be in a variety of games. If you want a CPU that's capable, it's good enough for a lot of games, it's going to prevent those outlier scenarios where you may be CPU limited at 1440p, then the 7800 X3D is going to be just fine, and you're not going to that you may not benefit as much from that faster CPU, especially when it's the worst value part, as you've sort of said, whereas you may benefit a bit more with the 5090 because you'll be more CPU limited. But then the other angle as well is there's almost certainly going to be another CPU generation on this platform. And so if you're buying the better value CPU now, the upgrade path for you may actually look quite attractive, which will give you that sort of buy better value now. You'll be able to get that upgrade in a couple of years, maybe when, again, those CPUs will be a little cheaper a few years after release, and then you'll be in a really nice position. Whereas the 9800 X3D being the fastest CPU now and worse value, there may not be as much of that upgrade option for you. So that's really sort of potentially like a set and forget sort of CPU. Like you may upgrade to AM5 and that will be the CPU that you buy on that platform. So that's something to consider as well for people. So I think, the things that you've said make a lot of sense. The biggest critique you guys have of the ARC B580, other than CPU overhead, is the lack of availability. Assuming someone is able to get one for close to MSRP, I've seen some models in Europe for 260 euros, would you still recommend that card now that we have a good idea of what the 5060 will perform like? Likewise, what price to performance would the RX 9060 cards need to have to make the B580 a good or terrible deal, for example?
Well, it's always a bit risky buying now with something incoming, but as you sort of said earlier, waiting has not been a great strategy over the last few years. So talking in, US MSRP terms, because that's what I'm most familiar with, if you could get a B580 right now for $250 or $260, $270, somewhere around there, then I think that'd be a really good buy and probably do that. I think that'd be hard to beat. Having said that, the 9060 is incoming and could offer considerably more value, yet to be seen, of course. So I can't comment too much about that. And what would it have to do to offer a lot more value? Well, it would have to have at least 12 gigabytes of VRAM for a start. That's sort of like that's tick that box. If it's 8, it's like, well, get out of here with that. If you're charging more than $200, $150, probably $150 for an 8 gigabyte card, then it's crap. So it needs to have at least 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and then needs to be better in terms of price to performance than the B580.
Well, I think in the best case scenario, right, the B580, excluding the VRAM angle for a moment, is about like 20% faster than a 4060, or is it a similar sort of performance to a 4060?
Oh God, it depends on so many variables, the games you test and all that sort of stuff. I can't remember.
But it's a little faster, right? It's a little faster and it's cheaper and it's got more VRAM. So with the 5060 coming in, Nvidia are claiming that card is somewhere around 20 to 25% faster than a 4060 at $300 US. So maybe in terms of price to performance, they're similar between the 5060 and B580, but obviously one of the main advantages that the Intel card's got is more VRAM, 12 gigabytes. So there is a scenario potentially after we benchmark these cards that the B580 is still a better buy than a 5060 at MSRP type pricing, just because it will allow you to play games that are crippled by 8 gigabytes of memory, and simply because the 5060 is still $300 US card, even though it will be faster than a 4060 by all accounts. So there's obviously that angle to play into it. So GeForce versus Intel, I still think Intel is in a good position because of the configuration they've made. It's just the supply issue that's been alluded to. But yeah, on the AMD front, obviously the 7600 is a very underwhelming product. So if they just rehash that again, then again, Intel's going to be in a good position. But if they do produce a faster card with more memory, they've got obviously the advantages that their new architecture brings, FSR4, all that sort of stuff. It's going to be very tricky for that B580 to be in a really strong position. So,
well, they almost offered 16 gigabytes of VRAM in the previous generation for $300.
Almost, they just didn't. If they had, it would have been great. But ultimately, that car was $330. So I think, again, like worst case scenario, you're probably looking at like a faster version of a 7600 XT at the same price with 16 gig of memory.
So that will bury the B580. Because the B580, like I said, it's $320 US right now. If AMD come in around that price point with a faster 16 gigabyte card, then the B580, if you bought one right now for the current price, then you'd be burnt. If you got it for the MSRP, then you'd still be like, well, I still saved like $70, $80, something like that. So that's not nothing.
I think it's that issue with, if you wait, you have a chance of getting burnt just because of how the GPU market is at the moment. But then if you don't wait, then you might get burnt because the 9060 could potentially actually offer decent value. So I think it's that thing, as you said, the current price of that GPU kind of puts it out of contention. It's like, if I walked into a store right now and I saw one for $320 US, I'm not like, geez, got to buy that. That's a great deal. I would probably just wait in this product segment at the moment, with the understanding that if the 9060 is good in that price range, that it will be hard to buy and you'll need to put in probably quite a bit of effort to get one at a good price. So,
but it's also a thing though. So once you know it's a thing, eventually you'll be able to get one. Like realistically, a couple of months down the track, like there's many GPU models now that you can get at fairly reasonable prices here in Australia. As you said, like the 9070 XT gets a couple $100 over MSRP, which sounds like a lot. It's Australian dollars, so it's like monopoly money. But it's
like 9070 is available very close to MSRP. 5070 is, the 4060 Ti.
The situation's much better than we see in the US.
100%. The issue for our market and the European market as well are the high-end cards where there's a lot less competition. 5070 Ti is still a little weird here as well. But the other models where there's more competition, and especially with like a 5060 to 8 gigabyte, no real interest in the card outside of very casual buyers, those cards are quite readily available. Obviously, some of the pricing, the 16 gig model now is a little higher than it should be, but we're like a week after launch as we sit today. So who knows where that's going to be in a couple of weeks. So, yeah.
I heard... I won't name names, but a retailer that happens to be in the Hardware Unboxed Discord said they bought about 40 SKUs of one of the 8 gigabyte models. It was a pallet model. So they bought 40 8 gigabyte 5060 Ti's and they've sold 0. Like to this point right now. So, and apparently of all the 8 gigabyte 5060 Ti's that they've got, I've been the only one to purchase one. This is like a major Australian retailer that gets a lot of stock. So they had 40 of just one of the 5060 Ti models. And
tough times for retailers.
Sold 0.
Yeah.
So anyway, I expect pricing of the 8 gigabyte cards to move downwards fairly quickly based on that. But we'll see what happens.
All right, we're going to hit pause on the questions and answering for this episode. We'll be back with another part in a couple of days. As I said at the start of this episode as well, there's part 1 up on the channel. So straight after watching this video, if you didn't watch part 1, there's plenty more questions that you can enjoy from us. Outside of that, we've obviously got our Patreon page. If you want to sign up and support the channel directly, you get some pretty cool benefits and bonuses there. Monthly live streams, which by the time this has gone up, we would have done for this month, but there's always next month. And you can watch both the replay of this month and the huge backlog of stuff that will be extremely outdated and irrelevant by the time that you watch it. So there's that as well. We've got the Discord chat, priority question asking is in there. We've got a special channel for people for that. What else? BTS stuff. Plenty of good stuff, in my opinion.
So much good stuff, it's hard to really dig into all of it.
Yes, even though I think we said all of it. So anyway, sign up to the Patreon. We really appreciate all our Patreon members who sign up and support Hardware Unboxed. So thanks for watching this episode. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
See you in the next one.